أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Respected scholars, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, all of you are doing well with the cold winter weather, and if the external temperature is cold, then we have a gathering here to warm our hearts and our souls and inshallah provide illumination for our lives. In this session, we want to talk about the crisis that humanity faces for our spiritual well-being. And the first stage of that discussion is to discuss whether we actually have a crisis and what the nature of that crisis is. Now, most of us who are here, we can appreciate that there is something wrong with society, with culture, with politics, with humanity's current place in its journey through history. But we should still pause because there are many people, even within the Muslim community, who don't think that we are in a state of crisis. And sometimes, as we move through the world with our communities and our friends and our families, we too might become complacent. You know, have you ever seen those ads that are trying to sell you a cleaning product, and they take a normal surface, and then they shine some special light, and they show you how many germs there are? Your phone, your laptop might normally be in your hand as you're eating, but then when you see it through that light, all of a sudden you think that it is as filthy as anything that you would avoid. You might never be able to have that same level of comfort. So even those of us who may know that on some level, that there is filth around us, I'm not talking about germs or physical filth, but the infection that exists in the air, in a society that is secular and materialist. But when that special light turns off, you don't have that ultraviolet light, you don't realize it. And even I or you might become complacent, not because we don't know that there is a crisis, but because we haven't seen or thought about what is the cause of that sickness. We live in a time that is materially wealthier than at any time in human history. In many cases, throughout human history, people's problem was that they were not able to afford clothing. And so one of the acts that is very highly recommended in Islam, just like it is recommended to give food to those who are needy, it is also highly recommended to give clothing to those people who may not be able to afford clothing for protection and for safety from the elements. Today, there are probably many people whose problem is that they have too many clothes and they don't know what to do with them, as there are people, at least in our society, who don't have enough clothes. For much of human history, one of the main problems was having enough food to get the nutrition a person needs. And today there are many people who have too much food. It may not be nutritious and wholesome, but rather than a problem of starvation, we have a crisis of obesity. So in many ways, our society today is characterized by abundance and plenty. And many people, they therefore think that we don't really have a crisis. We have a problem of justice or distribution. And if there were a slightly better policy enacted, then maybe many of the problems that we see within our society, they would disappear. And other people, they feel that even those people who are suffering, they are materially better off than many people who were considered wealthy in centuries past and generations past. So that is a form of complacency, not even recognizing the nature of the crisis that humanity faces. Because of that superficial plenty, we might not realize that there is a privation, an emptiness, and a lack within. It's kind of, if you eat junk food, you will be satiated. You will be full. And your body might be starved of nutrients, but you are not. If your body is numb, you might be injured. You might be bleeding to death, but you are not going to be feeling that pain. Unless you see it, you might not realize that you are injured, that there is something that threatens your very life. So that is one of the problems that we have within society. The superficial plenty blinds many people to the spiritual crisis that their society and that perhaps even they are facing. The second stage is to try to understand what is that crisis. For many people, they think that the crisis is the fact that there is so much irreligion and anti-religion around us in society. In a materialist society, in a secular society, in an individualistic society, religion does not really have a visible presence or place. There is indecency and obscenity, and sometimes it is difficult to make accommodations for our religious practice. So I want to earn a halal livelihood. I want to live in a wholesome environment. And I find the fact that religion is not being practiced to be an obstacle. It makes it difficult for me to live a religious life. And that is true. But there is a deeper problem. Our crisis is not the fact that people are irreligious or even that people are anti-religious. And it is difficult for me to find a wholesome environment for schooling for my kids, or a wholesome and halal way to earn my livelihood and to live my life. That I can't find movies that are decent and in line with my values. That is a problem, but there is a deeper problem, which is that even when you want to live a religious life, the very foundation and values and ideals that define what it means to be religious have lost their meaning, and so they are not even comprehended by many people within society. They are not comprehended even by many Muslims within society. It's one thing for me to say that, I want to watch something after a long day of work or school, and there's nothing on Netflix, there's nothing that I can watch that doesn't have indecency, that doesn't have anti-Islamic values. Certainly, that can cause some frustration. And then maybe a group of Muslims will come together and they will produce fiction, they will produce visual art that is in line with Islamic teachings or Islamic values, that adheres to the red lines of Sharia, for example. But there is a deeper crisis when the fundamental values that define a Muslim life lose their presence and their meaning within society. And then even if you adhere to the red lines of Sharia, it is a dry exercise because you don't know why you are making those sacrifices, why you are making those decisions and limiting your actions, because it is not plugging in to a clear vision of what it means to be a Muslim and why I need to be a Muslim. Let me just give a few examples. And as I give a few examples, some of you will say, yeah, I remember when that was how society operated. I remember when that was how families operated. And some of you are going to say, that's a fairy tale. You're just trying to romanticize the past. I don't think it was ever like that. And some of you might say, yeah, that probably is accurate, but that's because people were more foolish and less sophisticated at that time. There was a time when people would make their budget, and the most important thing in their budget was to be able to support a masjid or a Husayniyah or a religious institution that would be a gathering place for their community and for their family to honor and affirm their commitment to Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimu salatu wassalam. And if they hadn't made those sacrifices, they might actually have been able to buy a home for themselves, but they spent their entire life renting because they couldn't afford to buy a house and also build a place of worship. Now, these are lived examples. Some of us may have seen and experienced it. Some of us may think that, well, maybe there were one or two people like that, but it wasn't widespread. And other people might think that, well, you should have built your own house and passed something on to your children. But I'm just reminding us of values that would not have been surprising a generation ago or 2 generations ago within our community today. Whether we believe it happened or not, it certainly is not the norm. There was a time when a son would graduate from school or learn a trade or earn their first paycheck, and they would come to their father and say, "Father, this is the money that I have earned. It is yours. Tell me how much I can spend." Not necessarily because the father was poor or needed it, but because the son wants to say that until now I have been a dependent of yours. And now that I have become educated, now that I have a skill, now that I have learned a trade, I don't want ever to feel that I am not your dependent. I don't ever want to feel that I am supporting you. This is my paycheck, here it is. Tell me, how much can I take for my expenses and for my household? All of it? Some of it? None of it? It is your decision. Was that common? Those of you who have experienced it, those of you who may have done it in your own life, was it foolish? Was it beautiful? Is it a fairy tale? Regardless, does it happen anymore? Is it common? Now, that would be a very rare family and a very special child that would say that you are not earning, I am earning, but it is yours and I am still a dependent. Spiritually, regardless, we are dependents on the prayers and the dua and the mercy of God that comes through our parents. But even materially, for us to feel and to be a dependent of theirs when they are depending on our work. One last example. I can give the whole lecture of just these examples, but I'll make myself cry and I'll probably make you laugh. There was a time when people's aspiration was that the most beautiful building in their neighborhood or in their city or in their society should be their masjid. And if they had to buy a rug for their home, they might buy a simple rug, but they would buy the best one for the masjid. The best chandelier, the best adornment. Why? Because the house is just a place that I am going to inhabit, maybe for 5 years, maybe for 10 years, maybe for my life, and then maybe my children after me. But it's a material place that maintains my material body. And even if I live in this place for my whole life, it's my material life. And that material life is going to come to an end. The physical body is going to die and be buried. But the masjid is a home for my soul. And the soul, خُلِقْتُمْ لِلْبَقَاءِ لَا لِلْفَنَاءِ. You have been created to live, not to be annihilated and to decompose in the earth. That home is the masjid. And so I would prioritize the beautification of my house of worship over my own physical home for myself. Today you find many wealthy communities, you have mansions, you have well-appointed homes, and they have a masjid. And sometimes the masjid is kind of an afterthought, not necessarily as well taken care of. There is somebody coming to clean the house once a week or twice a week, but the masjid is kind of left to the devices of volunteers. It has to raise funds, sometimes desperately, because the cooling system or the heating system needs attention. Whereas our home, today if the AC breaks, if it's the summer, somebody will be on it tomorrow. Today if the heating system breaks and it's winter, somebody will be there today, no matter what the inconvenience or the extra expense. So these are differences that have taken place, and these are just examples that I am given. But what is the source of that crisis? Why is it that it seems to me to be a fairy tale today, or maybe it seems to me impractical and foolish to say that my paycheck goes to my father, and then he is going to decide what it is that I can keep? I say father because generally it was the father who would take care of the extended family and look after everybody. But it could be one's mother, it could be one's grandfather or one's grandmother. The point is that you would be serving a higher purpose with your paycheck and not serving the ego. Why does it seem like a fairy tale or foolish? Because the concepts that underline our religious faith have lost meaning. And therefore, and this is the important point, if there's one thing that you want to keep from this lecture, wake up now. I'll say a few sentences and then you can go back to your phone or go back to sleep if you need to. The one thing that I want us to remember is that when those concepts are lost, even our religious practice does not make us come closer to God, because it's not operating in the proper universe of meanings. So, for example, there are people who say that there is so much indecency and irreligion, and therefore my religious identity is important to me, and I want to foster a religious identity. Well, identity is an important point. And you do want a religious identity. But if I say that I pray, I wear hijab, I eat halal, I have a religious identity, and this is important to me, what is the problem? Identity is still about the ego and about the self. And there are many people who say that I am religious and my parents don't understand. They are an obstacle to my religiosity. My family is an obstacle to my religiosity. The masjids in my community, they are so bound to tradition and backwards that they are an obstacle to my religiosity. If everything about your family and your parents and your community and your ummah is an obstacle to your religiosity, you know what is the obstacle to your religiosity? You are. Because there is something that, and that's not to say that sometimes parents do not understand the sacrifices that their children have to make in order to keep their religious faith. But the proper way of thinking about it is not that my parents are an obstacle to my faith. The proper way is to think about it by saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen these parents for me, and so I have to discover how to honor my faith through honoring my parents. And the same thing with our ummah, and the same thing with our religious institutions. Because the underlying values and concepts of Islam have lost their color and have faded in our mind, in our conscious and our subconscious. Now, even when I want to practice, I get into a fight with my mother. I get into a fight with my father. I get disenchanted from my religious institutions. I go to a Muharram lecture and I say that, you know what? I didn't learn anything. And so I'll just participate on YouTube. There's a much better lecture that I can listen to on YouTube. And yeah, maybe you'll learn more, but you know what you're also going to be doing when you're watching the lecture on YouTube? You'll get distracted. And then you might say, you know what, I'll finish it up later. I have to take this call. Or all of a sudden you'll get an update on social media and you'll miss 5 minutes because you are distracted. And maybe you'll say, you know what, I can listen to this on 1.5 speed. And so you are getting information, but you are not getting closer to Imam Hussein. You want to get religious practice, but then you are getting disconnected from those very sources of strength that are going to give you religious practice. There are people who go for Hajj and Umrah, and they say, I'm never going to do that again. I barely had time to recite Quran or to read du'as because there was so much distraction and people don't have good hygiene and they don't have good manners. I can do much better ibadah in my home than I can in the masjid, or than I can when I go for Hajj or for ziyarah. I know people who have said that, you know what, I took my parents or an elderly relative for ziyarah, and I was so busy having to look after their needs that I barely had any time in the haram. And so next time I go, I'm going to make sure to go alone. Well, this was the ziyarah that you should put hope in, not the one where you're going to go alone. So the religious identity itself can become a problem because it is serving me rather than serving God. And that is why in Islam, we don't have an emphasis on your identity. We have an emphasis on your affiliation, which is wilaya. Your wala or your wilaya is your affiliation. You are connected to each other and to your imam and to your prophet and to your creator. And that affiliation is what makes you who you are, not your identity. And so the humility and the service, they are an integral part of your spiritual development, which then allows us to become humble and move away from our own ego. So then what is the nature of our crisis? I've mentioned that there are many people who are complacent because we think that superficially society is better off than it has ever been in the past. But there is more loneliness and more depression and more emptiness today than at any time in human history. And I'm not talking about clinical depression or a feeling of loneliness. There are many people who live fulfilling and happy lives. But if your fulfilling and happy life is not true to your potential and your purpose, you might not be depressed. You might not feel like you need therapy. You might not need any medication to function in your day. but you are also suffering, and you are also impoverished. It's like if I have a very valuable antique heirloom in my house that's worth tens of thousands of dollars, but I don't know its value. And so I use that valuable antique chair to eat breakfast on. And sometimes I'll spill a little bit of my tea on it. And sometimes I'll lean back and maybe risk it being destroyed. I'm enjoying that chair. I'm not feeling deprived, but that chair might be my retirement. And so it is an impoverishment that I don't understand its value. So today we are impoverished because, yes, many people are actually clinically and mentally suffering. And many people who are not are also just as impoverished, but they don't realize it. Let's look at 3 elements, and then inshallah we will move towards the question and answer section. And inshallah also our ulama and guests, if you would like to share insights, then I will benefit as well. One of the reasons why Islamic concepts have lost their meaning for us, and it's difficult for us to move towards Allah even when we want to strengthen our religious identity or practice, is because we have closed off our eyes to the spiritual realm, to the higher realm of existence. Let's just do a thought experiment. You're traveling, it's the dead of winter, and you get a call from your neighbor that your pipes burst in your home and the house was flooded. And you're going to have to replace the drywall, you're going to have to replace the flooring, maybe a lot of your furniture was destroyed for several hours before somebody found out and was able to turn off the water. There was damage in every part in the house. What's the first thought that comes to your mind? Thank God I have insurance. Or if you're like me, did I pay the insurance premium this year? Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of me. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have insurance, but what's the first thought that comes to your mind? For many of us, the first thought that comes to our mind when we hear something that's a big expense or a big concern is materially, how are we going to deal with it? Do I have the resources? Do I have the savings? Do I have the insurance? What is it that's going to come to my aid? What is the first thought that should come to my mind? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that requires us to plan and build our lives in a certain way, because society teaches us the opposite, and because we grow up in a way that does not encourage us to open our eyes to the spiritual realm. We often don't think of it at all, or we don't think of it first. The Quran says in Surah Al-Talaq, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. Sometimes people read this verse, or portion of 2 verses, and they think that those who are pious, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them a way out, and He will give them their sustenance from where they do not expect. They think that Allah will help you from where you don't expect if you're not able to take care of it yourself. So for example, if your savings are not enough, don't lose hope. Allah will help you from somewhere else. But that's not what the verse is saying. It's not min haythu la yahtasib, if you're not going to be able to do it on your own. There is a hadith from our 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. أبى الله أن يجعل إلا أن يجعل أرزاق المؤمنين من حيث لا يحتسبون. أبى الله إلا أن يجعل أرزاق المؤمنين من حيث لا يحتسبون. Allah has refused, except to give the sustenance of a believer from a source that they do not expect. Not that sometimes it comes from where you expect, and sometimes it comes from where you don't expect. Allah has refused. أبى الله إلا أن يجعل أرزاق المؤمنين من حيث لا يحتسبون. It's going to come from where you don't expect. Now, why is that? وذلك أن العبد إذا لم يعرف وجه رزقه كثر دعاؤه. If a person doesn't know where their sustenance is going to come from, then their attention is always towards God. Now, here is the important point. Whether it comes from where you expect or where you don't expect, it's equally coming from God. It's not like if I have an illness and I go to the doctor and they say, oh, this is very simple to treat. And they give me a medicine and it works right on the first day or the second day, that cure came from the medicine or came from the doctor. But then if I go and I'm not able to get diagnosed and no treatment is effective, and then I become desperate and I say, oh Allah, my fate is in your hands, and then I make a nadhr, and then I go for ziyarah, and then I'm cured, this one was from Allah. Which cure was from Allah? Both of them. Which one was more from Allah? They were equally from Allah. But which one am I likely to have a greater experience of renewal of faith in? The second one. There is no difference existentially. But the second one is better for our training. And that's entirely because of our deficiency and our inability to see God in the first case. And this is why وَذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْعَبْدِ إِذَا لَمْ يَعْرِفْ وَجْهَ رِزْقِهِ كَثُرَ دُعَاؤُهُ. When you don't know where your cure is coming from, where your sustenance is coming from, where your future is going to be taken care of, then you will be desperate and you will feel vulnerable and you will ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we close that door for ourselves. And we want to be able to plan, and then we depend on the plan. Now, there are some Muslims who say you shouldn't get insurance because insurance is contrary to tawakkul. That's not a good message. There might be some Muslims who say that don't get a prenuptial agreement when you get married because you should live a life of tawakkul. That's actually not necessarily bad advice, but it might not be for everyone, and so I won't impose it. There are some people who say that make sure you have an education and you have a job and you have a career, because you never know when your marriage might go south and you don't want to be dependent on a man, or you don't want to be dependent on another person. And I don't think that we should want to be dependent. But the point that I think we need to remember is that get insurance, have a prenuptial agreement, have a career. Don't do it so that you will not be dependent or you will not be vulnerable towards another person. Do it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to have tadbir and wants you to have hazm and wants you to be prudent. Don't think that that prenuptial agreement is going to protect you. Don't think that your savings are going to protect you. Don't think that your insurance is going to protect you. It's not the problem of having it. It is the problem of thinking that now that takes care of the need that I have, and so I am less in need of sadaqah. I am less in need of dua. I am less in need of asking Allah with vulnerability and with desperation, because I have a nest egg. If I didn't have the nest egg, then I only have Allah. Keep the nest egg because Allah wants you to keep the nest egg. But don't think the nest egg is going to serve you. There was a time when people wouldn't save up for retirement because they would say, my children will take care of me. Today, most of us are not relying on our children. We're not raising them that way, and we might not count on them. And that logic, if it was to depend on the children, was not good. But our logic of saying I can't depend on them, so I will depend on myself or my savings or my planning is also not good. It is a blessing. to have intimate relations and to have people that you can count on. Your parents will come to you and help you even if it's inconvenient for them. And your children will drop everything and come to you even if it's inconvenient for them. But you don't want the dependence to be on a material possession or a physical being. You want it to be on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we have created a society with all of these legal and material protections, largely because the people who created those laws and those practices and those devices did not believe in tawakkul. And our task is not to negate the institutions, the insurance, the legal protections, but to ensure that we create a space for tawakkul in our lives. That's the wisdom why Allah wants our lives to have an element of unpredictability, so that we can see His presence. That's why Imam Ali says, عرفت ربي بفسخ العزائم ونقض الهمم وحل العقود. Imam Ali, why does he say that? I recognize God when things don't go my way. When things go your way, that's still God. I went to school. I went to college. I get a job. Are there people who are just as studious as I am, but they grew up in a country racked by civil war? They weren't able to go to school. They weren't able to get a degree. They didn't have family support. They didn't have the financial stability to establish a household. Maybe they didn't have the ability to get medical treatment when they broke their arm, and so they've had a limp or they've had a physical disability since childhood. Can I say it's my hard work? Can I say that it's I that earned what I earned according to my plan? Of course not. But when we live in a society that has these institutions that protect the individual and that serve the individual, you have to work even harder to deliberately establish the value system of tawakkul within your life. So every time something good happens to you, even if you worked really hard for it, you say, oh Allah, this is only from you. And if it weren't for you, I would not have had this. Don't say I earned it and I deserve it. Say that Allah gifted it to me, and deliberately ensure that that value system permeates through your lips into your actions and into your heart. If you're going to get a tax refund in a few months or a bonus this year, then before you decide anything on your bucket list, doesn't have to be all of it, doesn't even have to be most of it, but the first thing you decide is what you are going to give in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To a family member, charity, to a community project, to a masjid, whatever you use it for, the first decision you make and the first thing on your bucket list is not, I need a new phone and this is the time for me to replace my car and this is the time for me to upgrade X, Y, and Z or take the vacation I wanted. The first thing is that this gift came to me from God, not from my performance and effort. And so the first thing that I need to give is to Allah. So the first challenge that we have is that we have taken away the space for realizing that we are dependent on God. Because of our plenty, we don't feel like we are fuqara. We think that the fuqara are not antumul fuqara, but it's humul fuqara, those people who are homeless, those people who are not able to meet their expenses. No, in fact, sometimes those of us who are wealthy are more poor, because the poor person knows that they are poor, but the wealthy person doesn't. And there are actually studies that tell us that when people become more powerful and wealthy, they're not able to have as much empathy with others. One of the reasons why this is said to be the case is because when you're wealthy, your paycheck and your physical safety doesn't depend on whether another person is happy or sad or angry. So I lose the ability to read your face and read your emotions because I don't depend on it. So in reality, I am more in need of vulnerability, of training my empathy. Once I was asked, why is it that Hajj has so much blessings when many people cannot afford to go for Hajj? It's only the wealthy who can go for Hajj. And the answer that I gave, and this is perhaps one part of the wisdom, is that it is the wealthy who are most in need of Hajj. Because the poor, their daily life reminds them of their weakness and their vulnerability, and it turns their attention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if they choose to take it. But those who are wealthy, they have so many distractions that they need to subject themselves to the sacrifice of Hajj, not to get ahead of the poor, but just to catch up. So that is the first thing. The second and third I will address more briefly so we have time for questions and answers. The second issue is that we have separated our heart from our mind. How many people sometimes say that my mind tells me that I should do this, but I just don't have the heart to do it. I just can't bring myself to do it. I know I shouldn't pick this fight. I know I really shouldn't impulse buy. My mind tells me that I should do things a different way. But my heart or my feeling is something else. And generally, what do people prefer? The heart. They generally follow the heart. I can't help myself. I understand what you're saying, but I can't bring myself to do something. Well, part of the reason for that is that people have separated the mind from the heart. Even now when we are gesturing, we say the mind and the heart. The Quran, however, considers the qalb to be the source of fiqh or understanding, as well as emotion. In fact, the synonym of the heart used for the heart in the Quran, you have the word qalb and you have the word fu'ad. And fu'ad literally means the seat of emotions. So fa'adtul lahm in Arabic means shawaytul lahm. When you cook and you roast meat and it gets hot, that is fa'ad. So tafa'ud is tafaqqud. Not in the Lebanese accent, but in classical Arabic. And that is the source of your emotions. And the qalb is also the source of your understanding. And this is actually a reality which studies have indicated that in general, when we intellectually discuss and debate things, we're not really debating things intellectually. We're actually debating emotionally without realizing it. Sometimes there are people who, they're wealthy, and so they don't believe in God. They become Republican because they want lower taxes. And studies have shown that over time, they become more conservative than they were in the past as well. Not because of a change that has taken place after thought, because their tribe now has certain values and identities. They joined the tribe for the taxes, but now they are adopting some of the other preferences, likes and dislikes, because of that emotional identification and connection. And then there are people who are perhaps Democrats. Maybe they are attracted to the Democratic Party because of their concern for the environment, or maybe for some other reason. But then there are other parts of the platform of that party that they might not have any personal stake in. But studies indicate that gradually they start to adopt those ideas, maybe a cynicism towards tradition or towards religion, or maybe certain other parts of contemporary progressive politics, because that's their tribe now. So in reality, our heart and our mind are not separate. But when I think of them as separate, what is the danger I risk? I am at risk at? I am at risk of working on my mind and forgetting that I can work on and change my emotions. And that's a challenge that many people in society have today, and many Muslims have. When I understand something, I think that I've passed that challenge. We're not comfortable with mystery. We're not comfortable with humility, because these are the days attributed to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A hadith of Ahlul Bayt compares Sayyidah Fatima to Laylatul Qadr. And Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr wa ma adraka ma Laylatul Qadr. Part of the greatness of Laylatul Qadr is that wa ma adraka ma Laylatul Qadr, you cannot understand it. Laylatul Qadr is not for you to say, which night is it? The 23rd? All right, I'm going to spend the 23rd with X hours of worship, and then I'm going to take care of my destiny for the next year. No, it has to be within uncertainty. You have to wonder, did I see the moon on the right night? Is it tonight? Was it yesterday? Is it tomorrow? Or was it the 21st? Or was it the 19th? Or is it one of the other odd nights? The mystery itself is what comes and brings you humility when you approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sayyidah Fatima is the same way. Sometimes people say that, why don't we know the exact date of her birth? Why don't we know the exact date of her death? Why don't we know the exact number of years that she lived? Why don't we know exactly where her grave is? It is in those questions and the preservation of that mystery that we can appreciate that our relationship to Sayyidah Fatima is through humility and mystery and wonder and amazement. And that is what opens up our soul. And so we don't want to separate our mind and work on getting data and facts and forget that the true need we have is to develop our soul and our heart in its entirety. We need knowledge because it is the heart that is the seat of knowledge, but we also need to work on our discipline and our practice, not just on the quantity of our knowledge or the quantity of our worship. And the last and most important thing that I will mention. So first was that we have closed the door of need to Allah and we just focus on material needs. The second challenge or crisis is that we have separated our mind from our heart. And so we want to be interested and intellectually stimulated and edified. But we don't realize that all of these faculties are the faculties of our soul, and they must be developed together. And if our knowledge exceeds our practice and our discipline, then it will be an obstacle rather than something we should take pride in. And the third and final factor is that we put our hope in the wrong things. Our relationship to Allah is through our relationship to Ahlul Bayt, and in particular through the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And that relationship depends on not our Imam coming to destroy our enemies that have oppressed us or that have oppressed other people, enslaved humanity. Not to answer my questions. I might have a list of questions about Islamic history and about tafsir and about fiqh. Exactly how am I supposed to do this? And when the Imam comes, I might want to ask all of those questions. No, the Imam is not just a source for our edification or for the end of our political or societal isolation or victimization. The Imam is a connection between heaven and earth. السبب المتصل بين السماء والأرض. And so our hope should only be in the assistance and the deliverance that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That has to be there in my life. Sometimes the goals that I set for myself, they are very narrow and very limited goals. I just want to pay off this debt. I just want to pass this test. I just want to get into the college of my choice. I want to accomplish this. Sometimes as we move up, we think that the solution is for a better candidate to get elected, or for a change to take place in my family, in my community, in my society, in politics. We forget that all of these things, they are shallow. They have their place. But our hope, our aspirations, our dreams, they should only come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our most fervent prayers should be for our Imam, not so that we can get what we want through him, but so that we can serve his mission and his purpose through what Allah has given us of resources and knowledge and experience and abilities. And if we understand these 3 points, it is my belief that we will be able to understand how deep the crisis is that humanity faces, and we will be able to learn the tools to address that crisis in our lives and the lives of our loved ones and our community. Inshallah, this conference, and through the knowledge and insight of the scholars and the presenters who are here, will give us some of the material we need to embark on that journey. But don't think of it as a conference where you take notes and you learn a lot, because that will defeat the purpose. Attend the sessions, take notes, but then review them and make a commitment to practice. That will be the source of our cure from the illness that afflicts us and humanity at the present time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.